Welcome back from the break, everybody. I hope everyone got to stretch their legs out a little bit. So we're going to be doing some exercises here. We won't get into the STE 3.0 tool yet, but later on we are going to do a live demonstration of how that works. For now, though, we're going to start off with a bit of curbside reviewing. So remember from earlier, we talked about wanting to make the assessment process as efficient as possible. You have a lot of people who have experienced damage, and you want to make sure you can get their permits to them as quickly as possible. So you want to make this assessment process as efficient and smooth as possible. And that kind of means you want to weed out the structures you know you don't need to do assessments for. And you can do that with your curbside review, where you're determining the disaster area, which structures have been impacted. You want to find structures that are clearly substantially damaged or structures that are clearly not substantially damaged, and structures that have already been built to NFIP minimum standards or to the standards of your ordinance, because those structures wouldn't require an assessment. They're already built into compliance. So you're wanting to narrow down that list of structures you need to do assessments for. So what I want you guys to do here, we're going to flash some pictures up. Here's the first one. If you could just go ahead and type in chat, do we need a substantial damage assessment on this structure, or do we not? Yes or no? I'm seeing a few no's. Yep. Yeah, and that's correct. This structure, as you can see, it is elevated. And it's got the HVAC system elevated. It has flood vents. This structure has likely already been built into compliance with your ordinance. This is a post-firm structure. It's already been permitted. So you don't necessarily need a substantial damage assessment on this structure. They can go ahead and have the permits written for them to repair as necessary. One thing we do want to note here is that the garage doors are closed. So they have flood vents. You can see the small flood vents around, but their garage doors are closed. So it's important to note those garage doors are not counted as flood openings because they are not a passive system. So that's something to note there. How about this structure? Yes or no? Do we need a substantial damage assessment? And again, I'm seeing some no's. Right, and that's correct. And this is very similar to the previous structure in that it's already been elevated. It appears to have already been built to your minimum standards defined in your ordinance. Again, you can see the water line does not reach the lowest floor of the structure either way. This is a elevated structure. Now, something to note again with this one, it also has flood vents. However, one thing you may not have caught just from this picture is that those flood vents are covered. Those are closed flood vents. So this is going to be these are going to be violations. This is a violation of your ordinance. Those vents are no longer passive at that point. And so that's something to note in your inspection. When you come back, you're going to want to make sure you notify them of that violation and potentially move through your community's violation procedures. So next here we have a couple of modular homes. And we can see that they've been moved. They are not on permanent foundations. So I'm seeing yeses. Yep, and that's correct. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. And that's exactly right. Yep, these modular homes are not on permanent foundations. They clearly have not been built following your floodplain management standards. And, you know, looking on the outside, you don't necessarily see the damage on the inside, but it's probably safe to assume that these are going to be in the range that you would want to do a substantial damage assessment for. So that's exactly right. So here we see a set of 4 structures. Looks like 4 structures here. So just talking about these first 3 here on the left, What do we think? Are we thinking we're going to need a substantial damage estimation or assessment for these structures? I'm seeing some no's. So, and this one can kind of be up to your discretion. However, what we would recommend in this situation, these would be great candidates for what's called a representative inspection, which is where instead of doing individual assessments for all three of the structures, you can just inspect one of the structures and have the understanding that they have similar footprints, probably similar build quality. You can see they all are missing skirts around the bottom. And so these would be a good candidate for a representative inspection. That last structure there on the far right there, do we think we should do a substantial damage assessment for that one? And I'm seeing some yeses. Yeah, and I would potentially agree with this one. It's clear to see that it's off its foundation, it's been moved. So, determining whether or not it's a lost cause, that would be important here to do an assessment for. Okay, so here we have a couple of larger residential structures. It appears to be wind and hail damage. So do we think we should do a substantial damage assessment for these? I'm seeing some yeses here. Yeah, and I think I would agree here. And ultimately what it comes down to is what kind of disaster occurred. So we can assume that the windows were probably destroyed, which means it's likely going to have interior damage of some form, maybe water damage from rain, maybe wind damage, and floors may need to be replaced. This might be another example of a representative inspection, depending on how you compare the values of the two structures. But again, substantial damage assessments would likely be required here just to figure out how much damage might have occurred on the inside. So here we have a much smaller structure in terms of size. Similar damage to the previous one. Do we think we should do a substantial damage assessment for this one? I'm seeing a couple of yeses, I think. Yeah, and I would say yes as well. And this is primarily due to the difference in size between this structure and the last couple structures. This one is probably even closer to that 50% threshold. While the damage was maintained only to one side, you can clearly see that the window with the has curtains coming out of it, so that window's been destroyed. It's safe to assume the windows on the other side, on the long side, have all been destroyed. So there's likely water damage inside. There's probably glass causing damage to walls. Carpets may need to be replaced. So this would require a substantial damage assessment. Now this structure, again, similar damage to the last couple of structures. This one's much larger, however, than the previous one. Yeah, and I saw some yeses there. Again, we just wanted to kind of compare or explain that there would be different calculations between the two, just mainly because of their size differences. But yeah, sure, a substantial damage estimation would be okay here. This one, so we see a tree has fallen over into the yard of a couple structures. Structure on the left, the tree has fallen partially. One of the branches has fallen onto their roof. What are we thinking here? A substantial damage assessment? Yeah, and I'm seeing some no's, and that's exactly right. It's probably safe to assume that neither of these structures were substantially damaged. Those are very nice homes. And it looks like the only damage that might have occurred would be to the roof of the house on the left, but it's not going to constitute a 50% threshold. So that's exactly right. This structure, so this was from tornado damage. Lots of damage to this structure. Do we think we need to do an assessment on this one? And I'm seeing some yeses here. So this one's a bit of a tricky one. So with this structure, you're talking about a structure that's it's clearly a total loss, right? The entire structure's been it's likely caved in, the roof is gone, walls are taken out. The structure is very damaged. So if you were to do a substantial damage assessment, I would likely assume it's going to be above that 50% threshold. So it may not even, you may not have to have that substantial damage assessment. You can probably safely assume this one's above that 50% threshold. And now this last one here, I don't expect you to answer this one way or the other. This one we like to throw in here because this is an example of good practices when you're doing these curbside reviews. You'll notice in the top left image, what they've done is they've taken a little postcard or a little index card, and they've written the address of the structure on it. It doesn't need to be an exact, multiple lines of information, but it just the simple house number along with the road name, just to help you understand when you come back to the office and you upload all of these photos of all these structures you've taken. It just helps you understand where you're at and how to divide those photos up so you're not getting confused on which one you're taking a picture of. So this is an example of a good practice here. When you're doing these curbside reviews or when you're doing these assessments, hold a postcard up in one of those photos with an address just to help you define which one you're looking at. Just for reference on this structure, this was actually a home that was located in Kansas. You'll notice on the front, that first top left image, there appears to be almost no damage at all. But when they went out and they did this assessment, when they went around to the back, they looked and found there was a lot of undermining, significant undermining of this structure. And when they went back, they took a closer look, they did an assessment on this and found it was about 39 to 40% damaged because they found the foundation to be a total loss. And so this structure would definitely constitute a substantial damage assessment because they weren't sure if it was going to meet that 50% threshold or not. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the substantial damage estimator tool, and we're actually going to have a play around with it. And we'll take a look at what it looks like. I'll show you how to enter in data, and we'll go from there. Let me share my screen. Is everybody seeing the substantial damage estimator? Okay. All right, perfect. For some reason, it's not showing the border around my screen, so I was unsure. But so the Substantial Damage Estimator 3.0 is a great tool. We've already talked about it a little bit. If you want to be able to download it, it's a really simple download. You can actually just search in Google for FEMA's SDE 3.0 tool, and it'll take you to that link to actually download the software. Again, it's a super easy download, and you can put it anywhere on your computer, and it works offline. So this is a great resource for floodplain administrators to use. This is going to be the first screen that you see when you open this program. And what I want you to pay attention to, first of all, is that you have this import-export function. What this allows you to do is, we talked earlier about some counties or jurisdictions have GIS software where they can pull into an Excel sheet a list of the structures or properties that are within their special flood hazard area. And if you format it in such a way as defined in the SDE 3.0 user manual, which you can access here on the home screen as well. If you format it in the way that it recommends, you can actually import that Excel sheet, and it will automatically generate your property database. And I'll show you what that kind of looks like in a little bit here. Another thing that's really important, and what I want you to start doing when you first open this, is there's this Enter Default Data tab. So when you click on this, it's going to open up this screen. What the default data is it's all the generic information regarding your community that will automatically populate when you're doing your assessments later on. So it's really handy to enter this information ahead of time. And so if you click, what I recommend you do when you first open any of these windows is if you click Save, oh, and maybe it doesn't work on the default data. But later on, if you click Save, little push pins will appear on the side showing what information is required and what information is not. So you can enter your city name or village name if it's a village, state, the county it exists within. Other things that would be important might be cause of damage. You can choose between the different disasters, as well as a duration if it's a flood, date the damage occurred. And one thing I will tell you is required with any of these assessments is that the community ID is required. And so if you enter that in, if you don't know your community ID, that's okay. You can reach out to us and we can provide that number to you. However, it is required in order to make an assessment using this tool. So once you've added all of your default data in, all of your community's generic information, and you've clicked Save, you can start adding new properties. If you haven't done that import function where you import all of your structures from an Excel sheet, you can also add them individually. Maybe if you only have 4 structures within your community that you need to worry about, this would be a good option. But when you click Add New Property, this is what comes up. And this is where you're going to start building your database of structures. This is where you're going to come to after a disaster occurs, and you're going to look at this list of structures, your database that you've already created, and you know which ones you need to visit. So it's going to ask for the structure, the owner information, such as the address, their first name, last name. You can also include their contact information if you prefer later on. Parcel number, if you know it. Latitude and longitude isn't required. Again, if you click Save, these push pins appear. And if it's green, that means it's not necessarily required. If it's red, it is required. And a little later on, we'll see yellow. That's optional, but it's encouraged. So the only thing that you would see in red here is going to be structure type, whether or not it's residential or non-residential. And it won't let you save until you select that option. Now, talking about which things are required and which ones are not, I would recommend you fill in all of the information that you have and be as thorough as possible. At the end, once you've made your assessment, it's going to ask you to produce a report at the end. And if you have a lot of blanks throughout this process, the report is going to also have a lot of blanks. And so it's not going to look so, it's not going to have a lot of information on it. So you want to be as thorough as possible. What you'll notice, you have these load default values. That's that default data we talked about earlier. If you click load default values, it'll automatically populate the generic information for each one of these. For now, we'll just go back. I've already created an example structure. And so what I'm going to do I'm going to show you a picture of a structure with a water line that we've drawn on it. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do an assessment live here, and you can participate in everything. But let me get that open here. Let me make it as large as I can. So can everybody see that image okay on their screens? Okay, good. So this is going to be the first structure we're going to talk about here. So a couple of things I'll mention really quick. This is just, we're just going to kind of play pretend a little bit here. So there's your water line. And we'll say this flood lasted about 5 hours. So take a good mental image, take a look at this, where that water line is. It's below that main floor, that lowest floor. You'll notice there's damage here in this enclosure down below for the foundation. Cinder blocks have been moved around, likely damage underneath here. But again, it hasn't reached this floor. So we've taken a look at that structure. And so now we've gone out and we've done our inspection on that structure or that assessment using that worksheet. And let me bring up an image of that worksheet. A little screenshot of it. So in your handbook, we've talked about the substantial damage handbook a little bit. There is this worksheet. This worksheet can be printed off. You can make copies of this, print it off before you go do your assessments. But it follows the same order as the SDE 3.0 tool. And so you can take this worksheet after you filled it out in the field back to your office, and it follows along with the SDE 3.0 data entries. So we'll go back to the structure again. Okay. So now that we've already done our assessment, we're back in the office, and now we're going to start entering that information into the SDE 3.0 tool. So we're going to add a residential assessment. I've already created my database. It was only this one structure. So it's already saved here. If you had more structures, they would all appear here. You would click on the one you're wanting to enter data for, and you would click Use Selected Property. It'll take a second to load. Okay. The first page is going to be all the generic information regarding the structure. You can add information as needed here. Again, if you click the Save button, automatically it'll pull up all of the required information. So latitude and longitude, again, are in yellow. You don't need to include those if you don't feel they're necessary. Same with all of the mailing address, the contact information for the property owner. Those are all optional fields. So moving forward, because we clicked save, again, you have those push pins showing what's required and what's not. So this is going to be a single family residence. So we'll click that. That checks off that red push pin. It won't need, now that we've filled that in, we can make the assessment and continue forward. Okay, let's see. So again, being as thorough as possible as you go through whatever information you feel you have, you want to enter it in here. For now, I think we'll move through this. I'm just double checking. Let's see. Oh, and so for cause of damage, we know it's a flood. And the duration, as I said before, was 5 hours. So we'll go ahead and we'll type that in here. Okay, I think that should cover that. So I think the most important page is going to be the cost page. It's the third tab at the top here as you move through. So on this page, this is where you're going to define a few things, and I'll explain them as I go through. So this base cost, this is something, this is just going to be the average cost per square foot to repair a structure. This number, as we understand it here at DNR, is somewhere between, in Nebraska, is somewhere between $100 and $175 per square foot. So we'll go ahead and just be safe here. We'll just say 150. That way we're in between that number. The geographic adjustment, this is an important one. This is a multiplier, and this is comparing your community to the national average of communities, right? The size, the value of communities across the United States. So comparing yourself. If you have a significantly smaller community than the average, you maybe would put like a 0.75 or a 0.5. Again, it's a multiplier. If you have a much larger community, you would maybe put a 1.25 or a 1.5, just comparing yourself to the national average. For this instance, we'll just go ahead and put a 1. We won't multiply it, we'll just say 1. And then the square footage of the structure. It's going to have this little calculator icon. If you click on that, it pops up this window and it lets you define the shape and size of the structure. So in this case, we saw the structure. We know it's just in this shape. We'll just say, so it's a 1-story. We'll say, let's go 40 by 30. We'll just be simple here. So it's going to immediately pop up a replacement cost, but before you continue, make sure to choose a depreciation rating. So here's where we're going to have the opportunity to define the quality of the structure, right? So we've got very poor condition, requires extensive repairs, requires some repairs, average condition, above average condition, or excellent condition. I think in this case, just based on looking at that structure, we'll just go ahead and we'll just say average condition. And what that comes up with is an actual computed cash value here, 136,440. So we take that, and now we've got the cost of the structure. And now we can actually move into the percentage of damage per element. So taking a look at this screen, on the left here, you have the element we're talking about. In the middle, this is where you can place your estimations for the amount of damage. And then it has the element percentage in comparison to the entire calculation. So you can see foundation is 11.9% of the entire calculation. So just because you put 100% in one area does not mean it may or may not impact the total percentage at the end very much, right? So what I want to do here is some of you may already have the handbook open and available, but in your handbook there are some tables, and I already have it open. And this is what the tables are going to look like. If you have it open as the PDF on a device, it's going to be on page 76. Otherwise, this is just an appendix within the, or this is just contained within the handbook. But this table is what we were talking about earlier, where it helps you define where you want to put that percentage, right? So taking a look at this structure with the water line where it is, and then comparing it here, you can see where the water level does not rise to the bottom of the first floor of the structure. So that would be between 0 and 25%. And so as you go through these tables, it's pretty clear to see that it's going to be somewhere within that 0 to 25% threshold. Where roof covering would likely be 0, whereas the foundation would likely be closer to the 25%. So as you go ahead and you start typing in these values, and we'll probably say just the lower percentages based on that water line. Cabinets and countertops, it didn't reach that first floor, so there's no worries there. Floor finish again. Plumbing, you might have some concerns that you would find as you do your assessment. Electrical, maybe some concerns as well, depending on where their utilities are contained. Appliances, you're probably okay. Interior finish and HVAC. And so once you've entered in these percentages based on comparing to the table that you have in your handbook, then you can come and you get your output. So it takes all of that, automatically calculates your damages compared to that cost that you came up with, that $136,000 that we came up with. And it gives you a percentage, a 10.9%. So that's easily below that 50% threshold. There's your determination. And at the end, you have a couple of tabs here at the top, the first of which is a summary report, and the second is a detailed report. These reports are crucial once you have this percentage determined. You want to save these reports. The summary report is just going to be a short and sweet. I think it's a one-page document. It basically just shows how you got your calculations, what numbers you used, and then the percentages. Whereas the more detailed report is going to be for your own records. This would likely be something you would want to maintain, but you don't necessarily need to share it with the property owner. This is going to be a much larger 5-page document that really goes into detail about the damages. The summary report is what we recommend you contain with the permit when you give it back to the property owner, as well as that determination letter. The summary report is probably more appropriate in this situation. And then really quickly, I see how we have about 10 minutes left. So let me work through here. Okay, so looking at the same structure again, but this time we've increased that water line. We've brought it up above that first floor. And let's say hypothetically, this is a 14-hour flood. The floodwaters were there for an extended period of time, and they were well above that first floor. So take a mental image of this, understand where that water line is, where it comes up to, and let's enter in our percentages again. So we're looking at this table. We can see, just reading at some of these descriptions, where the water level rises above the first floor level. This one says water level is 4 to 7 feet. It might not be quite 4 to 7 feet, but it does match some of these other things. Where you have saturated soils, cracks noted along the foundation walls, significant undermining of the concrete slab. And again, while it may not meet the 7 feet, it might meet other things, major cracking and separation of concrete slab. Portions of the foundation are damaged or missing. And it's important to note here that just because it doesn't meet all of those credentials, it doesn't mean it's not within that percentage. You have to use your own common sense and to come up with a percentage. So, with this case, with the water level being as high as it is, we can probably safely assume it's going to be closer to 75, maybe even 80%, right? Looking at the superstructure, water is over 3 feet high on the first floor level of the house. That's true, right? Significant damage to the exterior walls. We don't need to worry about the roof framing, but again, it doesn't have to apply to everything. We're just using our own understanding here. So we can likely say, 75% here. Roof covering, again, maybe we don't need to worry about that. Exterior finish. So the water level being, again, 3 feet above the lowest floor level. And the duration of the floodwaters, this is where that plays into, is more than 12 hours. We said it was 14 hours. So we'll say 90% there. Doors and windows. Where the water rises more than 12 inches above, yep, and we know that. Where it's longer than 12 hours, it was 14 hours, yep, so we can probably say 90% again. Cabinets and countertops, 3 feet above that finished floor level, longer than 12 hours. And they're not going to, one thing to note here, just because the water doesn't necessarily reach their higher up cabinets, doesn't mean they're not going to replace those. They will likely replace everything all at the same time here. You can say 100% for that. Floor finish, likely safe to assume that's going to be 100%. Plumbing, again, duration longer than 12 hours and 3 feet above that lowest floor, so we can probably say 100% here. Same goes for electrical. Appliances, likely they're going to replace all of their appliances. Interior finish, they're likely going to be repainting and replacing a lot of their interior. And again, likely their HVAC is going to need to be cleaned out as well. Maybe not replaced, but it's going to require some repairs. So here's what we have here. We come to the output summary, and there's your percentage. It's, of course, above 100% now. It's likely going to require substantial, the house is likely going to be reconstructed entirely at this point. But this is where it's important to come up with that percentage. Finding what's in between, 0 and 50, or between 50 and 100. Or in this case, even more than 100. Again, these were more hypothetical situations. You likely see you won't see percentages like we saw here. We were just trying to, make a point here and show how the software works. Okay. So continuing on here, we'll move away from the SDE 3.0 tool. If we have any questions on that, we can get to those a little later on. But for now, we'll move on from that, and we're going to talk a little bit about substantial improvement and just some additional considerations regarding substantial damage estimations and other types of assessments. So substantial improvements, very similar to substantial damage, but it essentially means any reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, or other improvement of an obstruction where the cost of which equals or exceeds that 50% threshold. And so where it may not have necessarily been caused or triggered by damage, it's still an improvement and it could still meet that 50% threshold. Now, the important thing to understand is that sometimes they do tie in together, where a structure may have received damage of some sort, but then they also, instead of just repairing the damage, also improved the structure in some way. It's important to understand how those things intertwine here. And again, like I said, improvements are often made at the same time as damage repair or shortly after. That's another thing that we want to point out here. The property owner may just go for the permit just to do the repairs at first, and then they may come back and look for another permit to do improvements later on. And it's important to make sure that those things are kept together. If that improvement is triggered by some form of damage, those consecutive permits or that phased improvement, those things should be kept together and incorporated into the damage towards the structure or towards that substantial determination. Another thing that's really handy, and this is so this is a screenshot from FEMA's substantial damage and substantial improvement desk reference, but this is also contained in a DNR's substantial damage handbook. But this is a list of costs to include when you're doing these assessments. So materials and labor, demolition and construction debris disposal, costs associated with elevating the structure, sales taxes, foundations, walls, interior walls, exterior finishes, HVAC equipment. This is just a great list to come to whenever you're looking for what costs to include. Record keeping. One of the things we like to note here is that whenever you're having to do these substantial damage assessments, you want to make sure that the permits, the determination, and the supporting documents, photos, that kind of thing, inspection records, if they had any engineered openings, if that you include those engineering certificates, elevation certificates, all of those things need to be contained together, and they need to be kept forever. All permits and all documents relating to floodplain management need to be kept forever. So that's important to note here. Some additional items that are contained in the handbook. So we've got field data processing tips. So when you're bringing those determinations back to the office and you're starting to compile them into your SDE 3.0 tool, or you're trying to organize them in some form, we have tips for that. Determination letters. Once you've made your determination on whether or not they're substantially damaged, we have some template letters. We encourage that these are official letters that are sent to the property owner once you've made your determination. And we have some templates for flooding or substantial damage related to flooding, substantial damage not related to flooding, and then a non-substantially damaged template as well. But we have those contained in our handbook. Determination integrity tips for making sure they're accurate with good coordination. Additional permitting considerations, infrastructure repairs. So talking about permitting within your own community and having the community permit themselves for repairs. Violations, how to handle the violation process within your community. And then finally, inspecting sites to ensure that they're building to your requirements. You know, if you've required them to build into compliance with your ordinance, making sure that you're traveling to those structures and making sure they're following your requirements. This is a couple screenshots here. We've got the substantial improvement and substantial damage desk reference. This is FEMA's desk reference, as well as just some frequently asked questions and answers to those questions about substantially improved or damaged buildings. So just some great resources from FEMA there. And Michelle has posted those in the chat as well if you'd like to access those. And then we talked about this a little bit before, but this is relating directly to the SDE 3.0 tool. You have the user manual, which helps to spell and explain all of the fields within the SDE 3.0 tool and how to complete them, as well as just some best practices as well regarding the usage of that tool. Those are other handy resources to download, and Michelle has also posted those in the chat.
So here, if you have any questions about National Flood Insurance Program, the contacts at Department of Natural Resources are myself and Elijah, Chuck Chase, and Katie Ringland. She's the head of our state NFIP coordinator. So please reach out at any time. Our job is to answer your questions and provide you technical assistance on all matters of floodplain management. So don't be shy, email or telephone at any time, and we'll do our best to help you out. And with that, thank you very much for your time. And stay tuned for more trainings from us. We do once a month, typically on the third Thursday and at 1 p.m. usually.